Hi, I'm Kate from dailytarotgirl.com, and today I am so excited to be talking to Ethony Dawn. Ethony Dawn is a tarot reader, she's an author, and she's a teacher, and she's the creator of Tarot Summer School. She's also the headmistress of the Tarot Readers Academy, and she has created, I believe, 4 tarot decks and 3 oracle decks, which is amazing. And she's the author of the book, Your Tarot Cord. So welcome, Ethony. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You have so many amazing accomplishments under your belt. And I just want to say I am so impressed. And you're like super young and you've done all this like amazing stuff.
Oh, thank you. I guess I don't really, it wasn't unintentional at the beginning to be doing as much as I'm doing now, but I've always been a bit of an overachiever.
Okay.
Like if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. Like I'm committed. I'm 100%. So I usually tend to go for things with quite tenacious with it.
Yeah, okay, great. So what I love about Ethony is you're Ethony, you're the creator of Tarot Summer School. And for those who don't know, Tarot Summer School is something that happens every summer, and it's 12 different teachers come together and everyone creates a different tarot themed course. And this year, Ethony's course is on tarot spellcrafting. And I just started your course yesterday. So I've watched kind of the introductory videos, and I haven't gotten to the part yet where I actually craft a spell, but I'm getting there. And I have to say, I love your course. I love your videos. I just love your personality, how you come across on camera. And I'm really excited to get into the spell crafting aspect of it. But I wanted to ask you, how did you first discover witchcraft?
So I discovered, first of all, thank you. I discovered witchcraft in high school when I was researching a paper for my Year 10 English class. We could choose whatever we wanted, so I chose the Salem Witch Trials. And I mean, I've always been very much into fantasy and magic, and anything like that was right up my alley. And I was researching at a library, and I came across a book called The Learned Arts of Witches and Wizards, and it was the only book on the actual shelf in the 1990s, I'm dating myself, that wasn't saying that, witchcraft was evil. It was saying, like, talking about the druids and, shamanism. And I was just like, what is this? And, and then I was like, oh, I felt like I'd found what I had already always been doing my entire life, and how I viewed nature and the world around me. And yeah, so it was thanks to a Year 10 English paper I was supposed to be writing, and I did write. I always felt like I was going to find it anyway. Like I was always a bit of a mystical fairy child anyway, so I think it was just a matter of time.
So you discovered it young when you were in high school. Were you a goth?
So I did have black hair at one point. It was pretty long. Never again, because it is very hard to get out, because I had to dye it because my hair is a sandy blonde. So I had to it was mortifying trying to get that out. But I wasn't really a goth in as a true goth. Like I was definitely, I was a band geek. I was very not a metalhead or a goth person in regards to that clique. And I had a lot of, friends who were very classically goth. But yeah, I was more of the geek.
Okay, but it sounds like you were into the goth stuff for sure. So do you remember the first spell that you cast?
I do. It was a moneymaker shaker spell, and in the course Spellcrafting the Tarot, I actually use that as inspiration. So I use this. It's from Silver Ravenwolf. She's problematic, yes, but back her Teen Witch book was very, very, I think, instrumental in a lot of teens finding the craft, and it was her spell from there. And then I remember that following week, I went to the aquarium, the State Aquarium in Perth, with my family, and I opened the car door when we parked, and there was a $20 note on the floor. just in the car park, and I was like there was no one around, you know. And so I landed a babysitting job that week as well. So I was like, yeah, this is working. Like for, you know, a 15-year-old kid, like that's a lot of money. If you can get a $20 bill for nothing and get a babysitting gig in the same week, you're like, yes, that's exactly what I needed. So
oh, that's awesome.
yeah.
I remember the first spell that I did. It was maybe 12 years ago, 13 years ago now. And I needed a job. And I had just gotten this book called Simple Wicca, kind of an intro to Wicca. And there was a whole chapter on doing spells. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try this. And I didn't think it would work, but I really put a lot of energy into my spell. And there was a lot of like feeling behind it, which I think helped it. And within 2 days, I saw a job posted in the newspaper that was like exactly what I was looking for. And yeah, and I was like, oh my God. And it turned out, and it worked out. I got the job, and it totally worked out for a couple of years. Then it didn't work out, but it was
what you needed at the time. For a couple of years, it was good.
Totally, yeah. And I was just like amazed. I was like, wow, this is incredible. And so then I started doing all kinds of spells, and none of them worked after that. And so I kind of lost interest, I think, because like initially I had all this success, but then all my spells after that didn't really work. And I think the reason they didn't work is some of them, I really wanted the thing that I was trying to manifest. So do you feel like that sometimes gets in the way if you're like too into whatever you're trying to make happen?
Absolutely. So there's a few things. Sometimes it can be that other work hasn't been done. Sometimes it's the universe making sure that door stays closed to us so another one can open. But yes, absolutely. If we're fixated, especially on something manifesting in a particular way, or we have an idea about how that magic is going to manifest, then we can take the sort of agency of the magic working in the way it wants to work away from it. So I always say it's like putting a fishing line out to the pond and then constantly reeling it back in, or having a very small pond to kind of fish in. Whereas if you go, okay, I really want this to happen. Like I've definitely been very invested in magic and manifestation before. I really need this thing to happen, or I want this thing to happen, but I'm going to allow it to happen in however the universe wants it to happen, and then forget about it and just kind of keep going on with my day and doing the small things that I can to kind of help momentum move forward. But yes, trying to hold on to a specific manifestation can definitely suffocate it a little bit. Yeah.
It's kind of like dating, right? Like if you're like super into a person and you really, really want them to love you back, like that's going to put out like almost like a clingy kind of vibe. They're going to pick up on that and be like, oh,
yeah.
Right? Like it kind of like works if you're like a little bit aloof about things.
Totally. It's like, I'm going to ignore you and that's going to make you want me. It's exactly the same thing. It's like, you got to be like, I don't care. Like, not that I don't care, but it's just like, I've got too much other things to kind of be doing or whatever it may be, but totally like dating. I love that analogy.
I went to a workshop and I can't even remember what this workshop was on. I think it was like Tantra or something kind of like that. And the guy leading the workshop said, the most attractive trait you can possibly have is to not need anybody or to not need anything. That makes you a very attractive person when you aren't putting out that kind of needy vibe. And I think it is the same with manifestation too, because I think of all the things I've tried to manifest, and it's usually the things that I've wanted, but like I haven't been like super charged up about. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm able to like step back from it. I'll do the spell or set the intention and then kind of like step back and like let things unfold.
I think sometimes people too, because like in spellcrafting and when you read about magic, they often talk about putting a lot of energy into it. And I think what people may misconstrue or may not understand because it's not laid out properly, or they haven't had anyone teach them proper spell casting 101, which is why I wanted to do a lot of 101 stuff, in my course this year, so that you're learning it correctly, not just from a book on a shelf that doesn't necessarily go through everything, or, you know, people will just fucking skip it and go straight to the spells. I get it. Is that there is a difference between building power in a spell and then feeding it with your emotion afterwards, right? So when in a spell, often they talk about power building, whether that's chanting or breathing or dancing or sex or drumming or you know, whatever it may be, to build that power. That's to help you build it in that container for the spell. And then you are supposed to release that with the intention at the time of casting. Then you're supposed to fucking forget about it. You're not on, and it's like, use that fuel, use that, like, I really want this. Obviously not, you know, saying I want that person to fall in love with me or whatever, but use that desire in that a particular moment to your advantage. Use all that fuel, whether it's need or whatever it is, you know, and then forget about it. You got to let that go in a way. And a lot of people have a problem with detachment, because if we detach it, we lose control over it. So there's a lot of pieces in spellcrafting and in spellcasting and in being a successful caster that I think there's technique in it, and I think sometimes that gets a bit confused, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And it kind of seems like those skills that you would need to be a good spellcaster also kind of just translate into regular day-to-day life as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you do something online, like, I'm trying to think, is it an online coven or an online group or something like that?
Yeah, I have a teaching coven, the Awakened Soul Coven. I've been running that since 2016, I believe. Yeah, that sounds about right. Because I had a number of covens and groups I worked with in Australia throughout my life, and then when I moved to Canada, I had to leave everyone, and one of the hardest things was leaving all my friends and family and my coven sisters behind. And I was like, well, I can't be the only person who's either isolated or doesn't have support around them, or lives in, you know, I'm lucky not to live in an extremely religious area that's very suppressive, but a lot of people do. And I was like, I'm going to build this to be online so people can join from anywhere and not have those geographical limitations. And it's been, yeah, amazing. And it's a full teaching coven. So I run curriculum every year, which starts in Samhain every year. And then there's a monthly subscription if you want to come in and do the majority of what we're doing without the curriculum on top of it as well. So it's a bit of a hybrid, and it's been really fun.
That sounds amazing. And I think that's so important for especially something like witchcraft. I think it is important for people all over to be able to join, because it's kind of similar to tarot. Like where I live, and I know we live really close to each other, where I live, like, I don't really encounter people being, anti-tarot or anything like that at all.
Yeah.
But I know so many people, especially in certain areas in the US, where they may live in an area where it is like really suppressive, and it's kind of a risk to be like really out there. And so I think that like the online communities have been like a real lifesaver for a lot of people.
It's brought a lot of amazing people to my life, and I've got lifelong friends now from the coven. And I always say to people, like, I'm here to hold space, and I'm here to teach as much as I can, right? I always tell my students, even my tarot students or my witchcraft students or whoever, like, always be discerning, always do your own research, just take what resonates with you from my teaching, leave the rest of it, do your own due diligence. But I'm here to be, I'll hold space for you to find yourself and to have that safety to explore whatever you need to explore, as long as it's not hurting anyone and all that kind of stuff, for you to find your own home, within you. So it's been to see some of the things to witness some of the transformations that I have has been quite humbling, because again, I started out all of these journeys not really knowing how it was going to unfold. And so it's been quite amazing to see just how it has been traversing, as I traverse along.
So we have had The last year and a half has been like super weird, right?
Totally.
Super
Yep.
weird. So how has your witchcraft practice and maybe your tarot practice, your spiritual practice, how has that helped you kind of navigate these weird times?
It's helped me to remember that we are all in it together, that community is there no matter what. It was really great to still have that consistency. So even though the world was kind of going to poop, having the coven, like there is a schedule, you know, like every month everyone knows what they're getting, even though we work with maybe different goddesses, but you know, there is a yearly curriculum and then there's a monthly one. So it's like that consistency, that routine, that we know what we're doing. You know, I still did Oracle Wednesday every week. It was like just making sure that I had that consistency when the world was, we all didn't know what was going to happen, was great. It was still, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, when everything shut down and we all went through it in like March 2020, I had a couple of panic attacks, not knowing like what the heck, because no one knew what the heck. So it wasn't as though I like just skirted through going, it's like absolutely not. But having that consistency helped, and having that practice definitely helped me stay as anchored as I could. And then I saw a lot of people, a lot of other people kind of move their stuff online. So I was lucky that I'd been running my academy since 2015. So it was more, I was very set up, and it was not a big bump for me to have to like push everything online. So it was, I guess it was having that routine, and then obviously having that space too for other people who were you know, the coven and people in the Tarot Academy and all my students and all my clients still having that space, you know?
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I felt pretty thankful too that I have an online business, and I kind of felt like I almost felt like the last few years I've almost been like setting myself up for this moment, because now I'm like, you know, there was really not a lot of bumps or hiccups that I had to endure because my business was online. But I have a couple of friends who started businesses like a few months before the pandemic, and you know, that not online businesses, like offline businesses.
Oof.
And yeah, that's like, it's pretty tough. So I felt pretty lucky that I had an online business at this
Yeah,
point.
me
For
too.
sure. Yeah. I was like, well played, Kate, well played. Okay, so what do you think is the number one mistake that people make when they're casting a spell?
Uh, there's a number one mistake. That's hard because there's a few mistakes. As I die. I'm not allowed to say the mistake. I think a lot of people don't take responsibility. I'm just gonna say it. A lot of people don't want to take responsibility, and they don't take responsibility. Now, a lot of people are very drawn to the craft, whether it's through media or whatever. They're very drawn to it, right? There's something secret about the occult. It's the same with tarot. People are drawn to it, and more people than not have probably had a tarot reading in most Western cultures, I would say. Because it's just, there's something about it, right? We all want to know about ourselves, and we all want to know about what's going to happen. So we're very curious creatures by nature. But what can be a real stumbling block, and there was a quote in a book that says a lot of people would be brought, I'm paraphrasing, a lot of people will be attracted to the craft of the wise, but few will follow the path. And that's because it starts to get hard and real. And you can definitely just like spellcraft and spellcast and not be a witch and not be a pagan and not whatever. You can be a Christian and do spells. It's spellcrafting, spellcasting, and the craft, witchcraft itself by definition is owned by nobody. It is the craft, it's the magic of manifestation through supernatural or unseen forces that have got no religion tied to it. It's in every culture around the world. So you don't need to be pagan or whatever, but that if you're not doing the personal work, if you're not doing the work that runs in line with it, then I think you start to get in your own way. And again, you can have a very healthy ego and do the things, but you might start finding that things start to feel a little more hollow. But if you can't take responsibility for your own happiness, your decisions that you make, like you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to rack up $10,000 of credit card bills and then go and try and cast a spell to get that debt removed. That doesn't run, your actions don't run in alignment with what you're asking for from the universe, you know? So that's, I think, the biggest thing that can stumble people up.
It reminds me of when The Secret came out, and everyone was super into The Secret. And I remember Oprah did, I saw this on Oprah where she was talking about The Secret, and she said, you know, it's not enough just to, you know, put out the intention to manifest something. You also have to do the work. So like if you're trying to manifest, say, a fabulous career, you don't just make a vision board and then sit back and eat chips. Like
that's a pretty vision board. I'm a CEO.
So in your course, one of the things that you say, one of your videos is on like do's and don'ts of spellcasting. And one of the don'ts was, you know, don't be under the influence of alcohol or drugs when you're doing a spell. And you said things can go horribly wrong really quick. And then you didn't elaborate. You're like, just like, let me just say it's like can go horribly wrong. But I want you to elaborate. I want to ask you a little bit about what can go wrong if you do a drunk spell.
It depends on the kind of drunk you are, to be honest. And that's the thing. Like the reason why I say don't drink or do drugs when you're doing it is because from a blanket statement that makes sense. Hallucinogens and altered substances. I've done kava ceremonies with one of my Fijian priest friends. So I've done lots of stuff where it's like, I've never done ayahuasca, but I've you know, I get it. Like if you want to, a lot of people have cannabis for lots of reasons, and they'll probably be fine, right? But from a blanket statement, I just was like, you know, for me, if it's dulling your senses, if it's dulling your ability to access every part of your extrasensory senses and your physical senses and making those work in alignment, it can lessen the ability. Some people are like super okay on it, whatever. But again, if you're a messy drunk, you might knock over a candle and set your fucking apartment on fire. You might wreck something, you know, and I'm just talking about, like, I'm a clumsy ass. Like I don't need anything else in me. I'll knock things over on myself, and I have in the past, on my own. So there are those like physical issues of, whoops, you know, I just burnt myself because I wasn't paying attention, because I'd had a couple too many wines, all the way through to now I have a huge energetic hangover because I tried to do something in a state that I shouldn't have. But it's really up to the individual. I'm not anyone's, well, I'm one person's mother, but I'm not, you know, there to tell anyone like what's, you know, don't do this, otherwise you're going to get struck by lightning. It's more of a, I don't view it as something that you need to be doing while casting, but there are cultures who also casting and drinking, or casting and cannabis and casting and hallucinogenics work hand in hand. That's just not been my training, and it's not been the way that I can handle it. I couldn't handle it on both. So
I would think if you want to indulge in that, maybe do it like after you do the spell to celebrate. That might work better. Because when I was learning tarot, you know, I was told you never want to mix booze or drugs with doing tarot reading. And I've definitely, like, one time when I went on a girls' weekend, I had a glass of wine and did readings for everyone, and it was totally fine. Like, but I wasn't drunk, right? It kind of like relaxed me a little bit, kind of helped actually. But I wouldn't do that if I was doing like professional readings, just because I feel like sometimes I struggle enough as it is to be able to speak and make sense when I'm reading. So I feel I would be so nervous.
When you're like, witchcraft, Whee!
Yeah.
I mean, I have the same policy, and I say the same thing to my tarot students too. I'm just like, I mean, I don't recommend it. If it works for you, go nuts. But when I did a lot of bridal showers and bachelorette parties, I would go at the beginning and I would leave. I'm like, you have me for the first 2 hours of this, and then I'm out, because everybody else gets messy too. And so when I'm like at corporate Christmas parties and all those sorts of things that I used to do, it used to be a very firm policy on like, I'm getting out of there before everyone gets too drunk, because I'm just not dealing with the myriad of things that are going to come my way when people are a little loose. So I am the same with tarot, but again, it also comes from your culture and from your background and the way that you use your tools. Some people just see the tarot as cards, you can sling them anywhere, whatever, no problem. But I came to the tarot through my craft. I came to the tarot through witchcraft. And so for me, it is an extension of my magic. It is an extension of the way that my guides speak to me, my intuition. It is how I perceive my psychic senses. So for me, mixing that with anything else is just not a fucking good idea, because I'm just going to feel like absolute crap the next day. I just know it because I tried it, and it just don't work.
It's really weird giving a tarot reading to someone who is drunk.
Oh, it's the worst.
It's horrible. Like, it's fine if they've had a glass. Like, I actually like doing some parties where the people I read for have maybe had a glass of wine and they're relaxed, they're in a fun kind of mood. Like, that's fun. But when they've had a few glasses of wine and they start crying and it's like, oh God.
Yeah, I talk a lot about Gail, my tarot teacher in Perth in Australia, and she said to me she has a rule about never doing a reading in crisis mode, whether that's up or down, whether that crisis mode is I'm really like up, I'm like having I'm up here, or low. And she's absolutely right. From the brain science behind it is when those things are triggered in your brain, you're not hearing anything anyway. I've done a lot of courses, and I'm sure you have too, and a lot of our colleagues have, on psychology and counseling and understanding brain science and communication. We do that as professionals, constantly learning about our craft and about people. And when I was doing a communication and relationships course, they were talking about how sometimes there'll be a partner that just wants to talk and wants to like get it out and into the open and talk and talk and talk. And then often there's that partner that shuts down. And what the partner who is like doing this doesn't understand is that person who shut down simply cannot process any more information. They're not shutting down because they want to be spiteful. They're shutting down because they have overload in their brain. Their hormones have gone into panic mode and they just cannot take it on board. The same thing happens when you are like really up, or you're really down, or you're crying a lot. You're not going to hear anything. You're not going to get through the emotion that's happening. Sometimes someone just wants to be heard. And I've had plenty of those sessions where, especially when you work in shops and you've got no control over who comes in, and you're like, cool, so I'm just going to hand you the tissues and we're just going to allow this to be like you crying. Maybe no one will listen to you in your house. I don't know, whatever. But yeah, you have to be the professional, especially in those situations, and go, yep, okay, we need to reschedule this, because, and I'm all for a glass or two, that's not a problem. But when you start to sob and whatever, it's like, okay, we're going to switch gears and just allow this to be you feeling your feels, and I'm just going to witness it and support it as much as possible. But yeah.
So when you're in that situation where you don't have a lot of control over who you read, and maybe someone comes in and maybe they're not a complete mess, but they're like really emotional, you can tell they're going through a lot. Do you read for them differently than you would read for someone who comes in as just like, I just want a general reading, and they're just like totally cool?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think this comes from, and you would know this as well, comes from professional experience of understanding different needs for your client. And so for me, I'll often ask, what brought you here today? And then if the waterworks just start straight away, then I'm like, okay, cool. I'm here as more of the Empress reader today. Like, I'm here to maybe nurture and help them feel better and just witness, because I know a lot of people don't have that in their lives. But if someone's coming in and they're like, oh, I've applied for these jobs and I want to know what the possibilities are, because I'm like, cool, I'm more in my high priestess mode, And then if someone's coming in and they're like, I'm cheating on my partner and whatever, okay, I'm gonna like bring in more emperor energy and be like, look, you. So absolutely. And I just explain to people how I see the tarot, how I do readings straight off the bat, so they know what they're getting from me as well. And then I just, I think, I mean, I'm a Gemini. I tend to be a little bit of a chameleon as well. So I kind of just work with my clients. I have had to reschedule or stop readings many times before. But if someone's hurting, usually they just want someone to listen to them and someone to be there and not judge them. And I think that's one of the superpowers we have as tarot readers, right? It's confidential and it's usually cheaper than therapy, or they can just pop in at lunchtime. And again, I think that's why a really good tarot reader can be hard to find sometimes.
I agree. I think that I think there are tarot readers out there who are not as sensitive as you, right? Like who maybe don't pick up on those nuances, and they're just gonna steamroll ahead and read tarot in the same way that they would read for anyone. I've certainly had, well, I had one reading when I was a teenager that was horrible, where the reader was just so harsh and she kept making all these horrid predictions about my life. And she was just like super dramatic, and it was such a bad experience. But looking back, I think she was maybe just really young and an inexperienced reader and just hadn't developed that nuance of being able to like pick up on who you're reading for.
Yeah, and that can, I'm glad that didn't deter you, by the way, because sometimes it can take a long time for people to kind of get through something like that. But again, that comes with experience. And I don't know if it was like divined or whatever, but I fell into a mentoring role. And I guess my like all my numbers, my numerology, my enneagram, all that is like the teacher thing. No shock there. But I fell into that kind of mentor teacher role very, very early. The very first group I ever had was a teen witch group in Perth. And so I fell into that very, very early, and not in telling people what to do, but just I wanted to find my people. And so through being 17 and meeting parents and like talking to them about what their teen is going through and that there's no dangers, and educating them and you know, come to our stuff so you can see what's going on and all that kind of thing, you learn a lot. And that's why I don't diss anyone who wants to pick up the tarot and read for their friends and start doing it. Like the more people who come to it, the less taboo it is. I think it's amazing. It's an incredible fucking tool. But there will 100% be a difference between someone who's been doing that for 6 months and someone who's been doing it for 6 years and someone who's been doing it for 16 years. Like you just have to be in the presence of like Mary K. Greer or Rachel Pollack or Robert Place or Teresa Reed, and you feel it like immediately. You're like, oh, this person definitely fucking knows that shit. You know, and it's just in the way that they carry themselves, you know. And it's a real skill, I believe.
Yeah, it is the kind of skill that only comes from many years of experience, right? You can't develop it in 6 months to a year or even 5 years necessarily.
Yeah, you can have an innate talent for sure. Like I had that. I was told by my, again, I'm going to sound like such an asshole, but I was told by my tarot teacher that I had, she's like, this is obviously the language like that you were meant to pick up. This was the tool that you were meant to pick up. But I didn't get really bloody good until much later. And I've taught students where I'm like, damn, you are good. Like you're not only adequate and capable, but you are good. Like if you decide this is what you want to do, like I can only imagine how good you're going to be later on. But again, it all comes with that, you know, you've probably done it. Like, okay, how do you handle someone who comes to you in a reading and they've just had a miscarriage? What do you do when someone's husband is dying of cancer? Like this is real life stuff. This went really deep. It's got really intense, but it's not for the faint of heart. But I think it's incredible when you can. And maybe you don't want to be that. Maybe you just want to be an entertainment tarot reader, and that's cool too. Like, do you?
Yeah. So that's a good segue into this next topic, which is predictive tarot readings. Let's talk about that, because I know that's kind of a hot button issue for some readers, right? Like, I know you do some predictive readings. I tend to not like to market myself as a predictive reader. Number one, because I'm not very good at it. So I'm not gonna, I don't want to sell myself as that if I can't really do it properly. So it's the kind of like, I don't love doing predictive readings. I don't have a lot of confidence in myself as a predictive reader, so that's not what I want to focus on with my readings. But I know that you do more predictive readings, and I know there's some readers who are like, oh, predictive readings are crappy or whatever, or disempowering.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, there's lots of people that think it's like really disempowering to do predictive readings. So I want to chat about that. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So I was taught to be a predictive reader. So right off the bat, I was taught that what the cards mean from a divinatory place. All that self-development stuff, all that whatever came later. So I was taught that way. So that really helped, right? Because I didn't have anyone saying, oh, you shouldn't do this or whatever. I was like, no, this is just how I know how to do the tarot. And again, it all comes to do with, it all comes to how you view and how you use the tool. So for me, I always want to empower my clients. And I say that the future is not fixed or fated, I don't believe. I've got a big thing on my website about like a video about, is it fated, you know, fate versus will, free will versus self-fulfilling prophecies. So it's a tricky subject, but I like to give people options, you know, and how empowering is the option. And so for me, it's like, okay, we've got door number 1, door number 2, and door number 3. Let's have a look. If you go down, if you armed with all the information you have right now in this reading, if you go down and you open up door number 1, this is the most likely outcome. If you go to door number 2 and you, with all the information and you make that choice, this is the most likely outcome. And if you go to door number 3. So basically for me, it's like giving people the option of like, if you do this, if you don't do this, if you try something else, if you wait, if you know, move sideways, up, down, backwards, if you reconsider, you know, less than like, oh my gosh, you know, you will be met by a tall, dark and handsome stranger. You know, it's like, well, sometimes people will, but that's not the point. So for me, it's always about empowering and giving my clients as much choice and as much control in regards to putting them back into the driver's seat of their life.
I love how you explain that about like the different options, different choices, different doorways. And also the way you said, like, this is the most likely outcome. It's not like this is what's going to happen. It's like, this is what's most likely. I like that because that's flexible. There's room for maneuvering in there. I like that. Yeah. So when you were talking about, you know, how sometimes you'll be doing readings for someone who maybe just had a miscarriage or someone's died. When I'm reading for people like that, I tend to really shy away from like the predictions and like going down a more predictive path. And so that's how I will read differently for someone who's like in a place of where they're really like going through a lot of stuff. So that's what just made me think of that question about predictive reading. Because I feel like, when people are in that state, they're more vulnerable, I think, to what you're saying. So I'm always like, I have to be like really careful with like the words I use. And I mean, I guess you should always be careful like with the words you use when you're reading for someone, but I'm like, I have to be like super careful here. I don't want to like, you know, be reckless with this reading. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of things with that for me. Is like I record all of my readings, even if they're face to face. So I always record them. I always have a record because I want to make sure that I am protecting myself and my clients. Obviously, it's confidential. It's just kept for my records. And the other thing is, as well as a lot of people, it's all in how you go about that prediction. Because a lot of people who are going through it don't necessarily want predictive readings at that point. That's just another layer that I can offer. You know, I do everything else. You know, I can do strategy. We can talk about healing. We talk about whatever it is. You know, we can do that in a session. But for example, someone who may have had a miscarriage, often if they're looking for a prediction, they want to know if, you know, will it be likely if I get pregnant again, right? That's the biggest question that I usually get for people who have unfortunately suffered a miscarriage. And for me, I'm happy to answer that question. And sometimes it's yes and sometimes it's no. But I always say to them, like, this is what's happening, you know, the snapshot of what's happening right now and the most likely it is. Doesn't mean it's not forever. Doesn't mean it's like whatever. Come back in 12 months. Give yourself time to heal. Give your body time to heal. Don't just go and try straight again, especially if it's a no. It's like, okay, there may be this rush. You may be putting yourself through a stress, and it's never, ever the person's fault about miscarriages. I want to be very fucking clear about that. But there's always a lot of, again, those nuances of how you can help that person feel validated, feel their feelings, and then have some hope for themselves moving forward. And I will never lie to a client. I have everything recorded, so I wouldn't anyway. But I still know how to kind of help a client in that situation because I've done it many times before. So even though it can be tricky.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So my mind just went blank. Oh, I want to ask you about your tarot and your oracle decks that you've created.
Yep.
So so what is that process like? Like, where do you get your inspiration, and what makes you just decide to create a deck? And do you work with another person when you're creating a deck, or how does it work?
Yeah, so it's chaos. It's chaos. But it's creativity is chaos anyway, let's face it. There's always a different inspiration before every deck. So the Bad Bitches Tarot was an inspiration for if I was sitting with my girlfriends, sassy, modern, very feminine, empowering deck. The Modern Love was like, okay, most readings are love readings that I get from my clients. Let's talk about how love is in many facets, from being single all the way and loving it all the way through to a relationship ending, and how love looks modern and not just, you know, this sort of same. For the Modern Goddess, it was a lot of the goddesses that we work with the Coven, and then bringing them into a modern spin too. Like, what would Isis, the goddess Isis, look like now? What would these goddesses be wearing? How would they embrace, how would they interact with a modern world full of technology? So there's always a different inspiration behind it and wanting to bring something new to the experience. And I do work with artists. I did do my very first one on my own when my son was an infant. But that's retired now because my art is not up to snuff, and I don't have the time to sit and kind of get as good as the people that I work with are. So I love to hire and collaborate with artists, and I've collaborated with queer, people of color, and all women, you know, as at the moment. So I try very hard to not only make my art diverse, but full of diversity, but also have work with people who may not necessarily have the same opportunities as others. So yeah, it's been real fun.
Oh, fun. So what do you like best, tarot or oracle cards, or do you have a preference?
My love for tarot is unending. So I love tarot for readings, and I love tarot because I do believe it is a living reflection of life. But I do love oracle decks for a lot of reasons. I use them a lot to close out my readings. I use them a lot for people who are just getting into using cartomancy. Use them for more open exploration, for understanding different themes in life. So I like them both, but I think if I had to pick one, it would definitely be the tarot. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I like both. I like how oracle decks are kind of free form. There's a certain kind of freedom with the oracle deck format, but I do love tarot. I would pick tarot, I think, over oracle or over
It'd be a very hard decision, but yeah, it would be tarot. It would win.
So how do you use tarot in your day-to-day life?
I'm constantly writing about it, or constantly making videos about it. So I'm constantly creating content around tarot. I have my daily readings for myself on my own altar in my room, in my bedroom. I have a manifestation, like a money altar. I read for clients, although I have been on a bit of a sabbatical, which I needed because I was like flat out exhausted. So I use that. I work with it in my coven, and I do Oracle Wednesday. So it's like everywhere. There's tarot art hanging up all around my apartment. Like it's very intrinsically part of my life. You would walk into my place and be like, yeah, this person is definitely into the occult. Like
so I found when I started my business, my online business with tarot, and when I started reading tarot professionally and teaching tarot, that my own tarot practice, I wouldn't say that it suffered, but I didn't do it as much. Because when I first discovered the tarot, I was doing daily draws every day. I was constantly reading for myself. And then once I started doing it professionally and teaching it, I now maybe read for myself a handful of times a year. I don't even do it once a month. I don't do a lot of readings for myself. And I remember I had a girlfriend who is a yoga instructor, and she was so into yoga. And then she did yoga teacher training and started teaching it. And she's like, now that I teach it, I almost never do it myself, right? Do you find that that happens to you at all? Like, does your enthusiasm for doing, spells and tarot, does it kind of like, after, a full day of making videos on this stuff, do you feel like, oh God, I just want to read a book on true crime or something like that?
I absolutely. And I think part of that is because you're changing from being the student to the teacher, or the student to whatever it may be. 100%. And that's why there's a saying in entrepreneurship, pick the two things you're passionate about and build a business around the second one, not the first, because you will get so sick of the first one. I don't think that's true for me. I've had career in HR. I did photography for a long time professionally. So I've done a lot of different things in my life. And the tarot has always been a constant. But when I definitely find that I'm less likely to do a reading for myself now. But I've found that, and I'm sure that you have had the same thing, I learn still from doing readings. And sometimes I'll be talking about a card and I'll have a moment of aha, or I'll do a reading for someone and I'm like constantly blown away. So even though you change it, those muscles are still getting flexed every time you interact with it and are working with someone. So, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm like, I will go watch reruns of the Golden Girls, like that is like, I don't have the headspace for anything else.
I like to, when I'm not doing tarot related stuff, I like to listen to podcasts. And I noticed, and someone was like, oh, do you listen to tarot podcasts? I'm like, no, that's like the last thing I want to listen to. I listen to all the podcasts I listen to are either about sex or death, like either true crime or like some kind of sex related. Like,
I love that. That's awesome. I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I find I have a business and I'm a single mother. There is no effing way I'm getting 5 minutes to sit down and read a book. Like, it is, I have a lot of books and I use a lot of reference books and I read all day for work. So at night, I like rarely get to sit down. So my audiobook, I can be washing the dishes, doing my laundry, driving in the car, obviously not doing anything that's important. Taking care of my son is number one, but I can be doing the housework and still reading a book. And I just started going down a rabbit hole of true crime. God help me. But like, I love fantasy. Fantasy is like, everything to me. Love sci-fi fantasy. And I do a lot of, I'm a total like 65-year-old woman. I do a lot of paper crafting and pen paling and creating happy mail for people. So that's kind of like my other creative outlet. And I watch a lot of YouTube videos and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm like you. I'm like, nope, not, I'm not listening to, not that there aren't amazing tarot podcasts out there, but like your cup's full by the end of the day,
Yeah. And I think if I had an office job, then on my free time, I'd totally listen to those things. So what, I'm just curious, what kind of true crime rabbit hole have you been going down?
Oh my gosh, I've been going down like missing people reappearing after like decades. And like, I've just watched this other one of like people finding stuff on Google Earth and like it's solving crimes. I'm like, what the heck? It's like mind blown. But it's been really recent, like the last 2 weeks. And then I found these 4 guys who do body language. They're body language experts. And then they're like looking at interviews from people like suspects and stuff. And I'm like, this is fascinating. But I don't know. I watched Mindhunter, which was fantastic. I wish they do season 3. I don't think they will, but I watched Mindhunter like back to back, and then I started having really bad nightmares. Like when I'm walking my dog Thor, like I'm like, like I start getting a bit paranoid because I have a very active imagination. So I need to maybe cut back a little bit on the true crime stuff. Yeah, because I'm a sensitive little soul.
Yeah, I get that way too, because I listen to the other day I was like, is this healthy that I'll do a full day of like chores and housework, and I've got my earbuds in and I'm just listening to grisly true crime podcasts for like 6 hours straight. I'm like, is this good for me? Like, because then I'll be out for a walk and I'll like a van or something will drive by me, and I'll like, they're gonna try to kill me, like 100%. That's a serial killer.
Yeah.
So the last question I have for you is, and it's a question I ask a lot of people when I interview them, and it's always interesting to see how people answer this. So I feel like tarot has exploded in popularity, and maybe even like Wicca and witchcraft and stuff like that as well. I feel like it's like exploded in popularity in the last like 10 years or so. And I think as time goes on, it's becoming more and more and more popular. Like, I don't think it's just a trend that's, here today, gone tomorrow. It's like gaining in popularity. Why do you think that is? Like, because I mean, tarot, it's always been around, it's been around a long time, but I feel like it's becoming a bigger thing. And do you have any thoughts on why that is?
Dude, this is going to be another deep one. I believe it's because it's becoming increasingly apparent of the disconnect between the powerful and the people who are in control and who want to keep destroying the planet and keep oppressing people and all that. And people are waking up, and thanks to social media, I mean, we could talk about the pros and cons of social media all day. People are becoming a lot more aware of what's been stolen from them, whether that is from their culture or what they like, just outraged, right? Like, and there's so much to be outraged on about at the moment. It's numbing to a point. And I think because of that, people are trying to find ways to empower themselves outside of a lot of the systems that have tried to control them their entire lives, whether that is religion or school or governments or work or whatever it may be. There is more of that. I want to empower my life and create positive change. And it's becoming I'm really glad that it's becoming more and more popular and people are talking about it more openly, because I don't feel like it's going to go anywhere. So it has spiked a bit, like we saw when like Charmed and all that came out. It definitely spiked up, and then it's coming back around as well and spiking. But it's the rebels and those who want to try and protect the earth and speak up for people and align with people who are, and of course, Indigenous people are the ones who are trying to save the friggin' planet. Like, of course they are. As a whole, right? If you look at who is doing the work, who's on the front lines, it's always, Indigenous people. It's always people who've had their lands colonized and all that kind of stuff. So it's an interesting perspective, but I do believe it is very political in its base. That's why it's happening, and power systems are failing a lot of people.
That's a really fascinating answer, and it's very similar to the answer that Sasha Graham gave when I asked her. So she said, like, people want to feel more empowered, like it comes from, and she referenced kind of sort of the political spectrum and people feeling disempowered and searching for that sense of empowerment and a sense of control and understanding over their own lives. And I love what you said, how you kind of highlighted how people are starting to wake up to the imbalance of power and kind of what's happening. And I think that global warming and like this heat wave that we're experiencing in the Northwest right now, like all of those things, I think kind of bring these things to light more. Like I think it's becoming harder and harder to ignore and pretend that corporations don't run everything and that they're
Oh, they
destroying
do,
the
yeah,
planet.
100%. And the thing is, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. Like I'm actually not. I believe in science as well as magic, but you have to follow the paper trail. It's not even hidden. It's not even hidden. It's like out in plain sight that corporations have a lot more control than governments in a lot of places. So yeah, people are really struggling with you're told at home you don't have any control until then you're at school. Then if you're in a religious group or a part of a religion that tells you, no, you're cut off from God, I'm the only conduit, you must what are your sins and blah blah. If you're constantly being told these disempowering things, and that's not everyone's experiences. Some people are very happy in the church, they have very empowering parents, they have a great school experience, but everyone's cocktail is very unique. But yeah, I do feel it's geopolitical, it's environmental, it's cultural, it's generational, and I hope more and more people become more awake to the connection they can have with the world around them and themselves and each other, and be less divisive. That would be really nice.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. And I think people are yearning for a sense of spiritual connection, and that connection to kind of the unseen realm and the unseen part of life, because I think that our culture is so focused on the physical, right? Like on money, appearance, power, like those kinds of things, that there's not a lot of honor given to the sacred aspect of life. Like there's no honor given to the spirit or the soul or energy. Those things just aren't really recognized in our kind of mainstream sort of culture, and I think that that's created like a real thirst for that.
Or it's been monetized to the point of a level of ridiculousness. So you can just look at the trend of how popular yoga has become in the Western world, and how the spirituality of yoga has been stripped in a lot of cases. Like you have hatha yoga, you have like hot yoga, I don't remember what it's called, and it's like, yeah, I went in 40-degree heat, and it becomes like this bragging, right, and not really about the practice itself. And again, I'm not talking about every yoga teacher, I'm not talking about every yoga practitioner or every school of yoga, but we look at it now, it's like everything that becomes popular can start to become skewed through making money. And I'm not saying I have a business I'm running too, I get it, but I wanted to help people find their own thing through tools, yes, and often we need tools to help us, but the more people can come back to themselves and back to what's happening within them, that healed people thing, and then it can be that ripple effect, right? So I'm hopeful that that we're waking up together. We'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah. Let's check back in 10 years, see where we're at.
Yeah, fingers crossed, man.
I'm not surrounded by flames and
yeah. Oh gosh, I hope not.
I know.
Poor kid.
I know. Well, so Ethony, where can people find you if they want to find out more about you and your work?
So my website is ethony.com. I'm at Ethony on Instagram, Ethony on YouTube, tarotreadersacademy.com. Basically, if you just